Welcome to the Love Your Inner Athlete podcast, your go-to source for all things mental fitness in sports. Whether you're an athlete, coach, or parent, you will learn as you join us to dive into inspiring conversations with those who have worked to develop their mental fitness. You will hear from people who have put in the work as either an athlete, coach, or a parent. In each episode, we bring you discussions and expert insights on developing resilience, focus, and mindset. Discover the concepts of mental fitness and learn how to use it to create consistent, durable confidence in both sports and life. I'm your host, Hans Schulstedt. Let's get started. Welcome to the Love Your Inner Athlete podcast. I'm Hans Schulstedt, your host. This is the podcast where we talk about all things about loving your inner athlete, mental performance, mental fitness, and just generally how to get better. I'm pleased today to have on the podcast Lance Pitlick, a former Gopher hockey player, former NHLer who's played a long time in the NHL, and now he's a skills coach. He's worked with my son and some of his friends, and actually, you may not be aware of it, but the last time we did a podcast for yours, that podcast actually brought me a few clients that you coach.
Well, isn't that nice? So it works.
Great. And it's been great to hear what a great mentor you've been to those kids and how much those kids really respect you and look up to you. What I hear from those kids often, whether they're young or old, is not only do you teach great hockey skills, but you're also a great mentor.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. I mean, way to start the podcast off on a great note. I love you.
Well, and then one of my professional players once told me that going to you is like a cheat code for hockey.
Well, only if they attach some action to what they learn with me. But thank you. Very nice. Well, very nice.
And my son definitely loves all the work he did with you. Actually, what he's been doing this spring is working through your online training modules in the basement.
Awesome.
So next time through, he's actually going to do it with the vision training glasses where it blinds you like for milliseconds. So,
okay. Yeah. Awesome.
Tell the listeners and viewers a little bit about your background and in hockey. Like, where did you play high school? And tell me about your journey all the way up to the NHL.
Well, if you come out of the Blaine Super Rink and go towards Highway 65, I think it is there.
Yeah.
Directly across the street at that stop sign or stop light, there's like a junkyard and then a trailer court.
Yeah.
That's where I started out, right there in the trailer court, not in the junkyard, but so I grew up in Blaine for a while. My parents split up when I was going into fifth grade, I think, and we moved to New Hope.
Yeah.
And that's where I played my youth hockey is New Hope. Went to Robbinsdale Cooper High School.
Yeah.
Played 3 years there. And, you know, my childhood was, I think it's very similar because, I tried to, replicate it for my kids, but it was when you got home from school and you didn't have anything going on, you were somewhere with your buddies or they were at your house and you were playing some sport outside, basketball, tennis. Once in a while, we'd organize a baseball game, but that seemed to be a lot of work. So we didn't do that too much. But yeah, so I just, I really had a normal, active childhood. One thing that I do remember that I used to play baseball before I stopped playing baseball. So I was a catcher. And I developed what's called Osgood-Schlatters disease.
Yeah.
So it's a knee problem that happens when kids, they're developing as young kids. So back then they would cast you. So I got diagnosed right before school got out. So I had to wear an ankle to hip cast. I could take it off so I could take a shower once in a while. But I had to spend my whole summer then, plowing around with just one leg. But yeah, I just have fond memories of being a kid, and my parents weren't rich, they weren't poor, and I remember just having a happy childhood.
So you played at Cooper, And
Correct.
I think I've seen your picture on the wall at New Hope Ice Arena, which is where my son has grown up playing and still plays. Tell me how you went from Cooper to play over at the U of M.
So it was interesting. I was getting some attention, not for my skill, but more for my ability to run over people and to play the defensive game hard. So you didn't have the internet back then, and my parents didn't know anything about hockey. Neither of them played, and I got some letters in the mail with some interest that were interested in maybe having you out here, but there was never any follow-up on it. I was fortunate my senior year to be picked on a team that was coached by Herb Brooks. It was called Team Minnesota, and put together a bunch of players from around Minnesota. And then we went out to, I think it was Boston, and we played some tournament out there against Michigan, Mass, and New England. So I think we ended up winning that tournament in kind of a dramatic fashion, but that got me, a little more attention that maybe put it over the top. But I ended up at the last second. I had an old, crusty coach. He was a former professional baseball player named Ken Staples, and he was a school teacher at Cooper High School. And he just one day pulled me aside and said, "Hey, someone from the Gophers wants to meet with us tomorrow in the cafeteria." I'm like, all right.
All have times changed.
Yeah. So Bill Butters, and this is after the hockey season's over when I'm having this meeting. So I'm in my senior year. Yeah. I don't know what's happening next year. And I was just hopeful. I was hoping something was going to happen. But anyway, so Bill Butters, he was the defensive coach back then, came in there, and we sat down in the cafeteria, and he proceeded to tell my coach and I everything he loved about me and my game. And at the last, sentence, he says, "And we'd like you to be a Gopher." And they offered me a half a scholarship, and I accepted it. And what's interesting is that myself and I believe Casey Hankinson were the last two of that recruiting class to sign. Both of us went there on half scholarships, very close to each other. And we committed very close to each other. And this is for all you young ones out there that don't, it's not an easy road where you got to kind of scratch and claw. But both of us, our senior year, ended up becoming captains of that team. So that was pretty cool. So yeah, I accepted that, and I got to play for the hometown team. So it was a dream come true.
Yeah. Did you play in the USHL before you went there?
Nope. Back then, they pretty much brought you in as a true freshman. So I was with Rob Stauber, that recruiting class, Randy Scarda. Who else was in there? Brett Strote. Blaine Rude was another one from Fergus Falls. But yeah, and Jeff Paletti. And it's all coming back, 57, but I still got it, Hans.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we all went in as true freshmen, and I went in there that first year, and then you spend a summer working out with everyone, and getting acclimated to what college is going to be and getting familiar with the campus. But I went in there hoping that I'd get to play, but I was a healthy scratch probably the first 4 or 5 weekends. So that weighs on you as a freshman, being the first time away from home and not being a great student. But I had a great roommate. He was the MVP of the state tournament 2 years in a row. That's the other one that I just remembered is Scott Bloom. So sure. he made life interesting in the dorm room.
Yeah. Did you get drafted in the NHL, or did you sign as a college free agent?
Nope, I did. I got it was during actually my high school graduation party, and someone came up to me and said, "Hey, congratulations." I'm like, "On what?" And they said, "You got drafted." So I got drafted by the Minnesota North Stars back then when they were here in 9th round. I don't know. I think after the 5th round, they just put pictures of the players that are left and blindfold the GM and throw a dart and, "All right, North Stars, you got Lance Pitlick. Nice job." So that's where I got drafted, but I never played or signed with them.
Yeah. And then where did you go? Where did you first play?
So what happened is I got hurt my senior year playing for the Gophers. I had a sports hernia, but I popped my groin, so I thought it was a groin injury, and they just didn't know what they know today back then about sports hernias. I should have been out 6 weeks, and I was out 6 months. So I was drafted by the North Stars, like I said, and in that time of being drafted, the team ended up leaving Minnesota. It was the split of San Jose
Oh yeah, I
and the
remember.
Gun Brothers. That's what it was. I mean, there's cheapers. It's hard to keep all this stuff together. But anyways, so Bobby Clark was the GM of the North Stars, and he ended up. I thought I was going to sign. My agent said, "Yeah, I'm just going to try to get a little more on the signing bonus, which wasn't much. Maybe like $40,000, $50,000." Then my agent calls and he goes, "Man, I don't know how to tell you this, but they just released you." And I'm like, "What? I thought we were going to sign." And he said, "Yeah." And so I guess Bobby Clark said, we're just not going to sign anyone that we might lose to San Jose. Not like I was a big person, but anyways, so ironic. It's just a great story. You might remember a name, Glenn Sonmore, who was a coach, GM for the Minnesota North Stars, then was a scout. He was the guy who got me drafted with the North Stars. So he was a big supporter of me. So I got released. I find out that he's out in Philadelphia. So I call him, have a conversation with him. And the guy, he had my back. Within less than 24 hours, he had the same contract that that they had originally offered me on the table. And I ended up signing with them and for 4 years.
So how long did your career go?
So I played 4 years in Hershey. I played 5 years in Ottawa. The first 2 years I was up and down there. And then I played 3 years with the Florida Panthers. And then my last year I signed with the Colorado Avalanche, and I didn't even make it out of training camp. My body just, my back and everything. So I ended up retiring probably 2.5 weeks into training camp, and that was it.
So tell me how you ended up doing what you're doing now, coaching kids on stick handling, scoring, all that stuff.
When I was playing, you're playing in the minors. I wasn't making a ton of cash, so I had to work a little bit in the summer. So I had a hockey school that started out in Brooklyn Park, and I had a New Hope for a while, but I had a few different locations for 4 or 5 summers where I'd run a skills camp, an on-ice deal. I didn't know what I was doing. I just got a couple buddies and they helped us out. So I did that. And then once I had kids, that's where it kind of shifted, where there was an interest. Obviously, we were going to introduce them to hockey. Didn't know if either of them were going to take to it. But once they did, if you played in the NHL and your kid's going to play hockey, you're expected to coach. And I didn't want to suck as a coach. So I started to self-learn, because even though you play at the highest level, it doesn't mean you can teach a 3-year-old how to skate or, what the progressions are. So that's where my real education started, is when my kids got involved in hockey. And I was just blessed to have some really great coaches that mentored me on how to work with young kids. So I was grateful for a lot of people.
So what would you say the biggest challenges were for you learning how to coach? Because, you hear that all the time. Like, just because Michael Jordan was great or Wayne Gretzky was great, that didn't mean they were great coaches.
Oh, exactly. And I'm sure that when I first started, I don't know if I ever became great, but I think that, I definitely wasn't very good, and I was learning and made a ton of mistakes. But I spent a lot of time watching the internet. YouTube was starting to come, so you could get access to some European training. Everything back then was DVDs. So I just was like, holy cow, there's skating, you got to teach them how to skate. And then once they can do that, then you throw a stick. So I just learning the progressions and then finding your rhythm on how you're going to teach kids where, they're not staring at the window, licking at, the plexiglass, because you can't keep their attention. So, and I'm still learning, and it's there's no excuse to become really good at something these days, because you want to become a better communicator with kids. Just go to YouTube and type it in there, and you have hours and hours of people sharing their life learning lessons, and it's awesome.
Do you remember that kind of the way that I got to know you was through your wife when I think it was Rhett was on that team at Wyzetta when there was the tragedy up in Brainerd?
Yes.
And both your kids are great people. Tell me what it was like to coach those kids.
If you would ask them, they would say that I totally undercoached them, that a lot of times they didn't even know that we were related, on the ice. But, that's kind of how it is. Our rule was, and this was someone shared it with me, that if you got something to tell your kid, have one of the other coaches tell it to them, because we all go through that phase where mom and dad don't know crap. And so you learn to be the messenger for other people. And I just right away kind of took the position that I'm going to be saying stuff to kids that I'd be saying to my own kid. So that's kind of how that all kind of began. And again, I'm still working on it, and every kid's different, but it's fun. That's a great challenge to see how each kid receives inputs.
Yeah. So I remember during COVID bringing my son over to your basement along with his buddy Avery and sitting there watching you work with them, and you and I having some conversations. And what I would say is we both care a lot about like the mental part of the game, right? So when you think about coaching that part of the game, either with your own kids or the kids that come to see you in your basement or wherever you work with them, how do you usually coach confidence?
You can show how to earn confidence. And, for me, specializing in stick skills, everyone wants to make the good play, the pass, and score the goal. If I'm doing a drill downstairs and let's say I give them 10 repetitions shooting and they don't get any, or they maybe get one, I just say, do you think if you could get 5 out of 10, that when you get on the ice, you're going to have a little more confidence? So that's just getting the extra practice. And you just got to get in the sandbox and you start playing, and something happens and a memory will pop up that happened to me. I'm like, God, that happened to me too. And did you just get frustrated? Every day is new. A lot of it's the same, but so much of it is different depending on who's there and depending on what's going on. If they're coming off an injury, if they're, struggling on the ice, and if they don't have a great relationship with their coach. There's so many other dynamics that come into play besides the physical improvement of the player. And a lot of that stuff seeps into lessons as well, not only with the player, but with parents as well.
What would you tell a young player or a player of any age, actually, how to handle playing for a difficult coach or a challenging relationship with a coach?
Oh, I can say that I speak from experience, and, you're playing a team sport, and unfortunately there's two roads you can take. You can take the road of bucking the system and just always being not a problem, but just being disruptive, or you can figure out a compromise or something where you each win. But the biggest thing is when that happens, it's usually not just one player. It's usually the whole team or most of the team. So in those situations, we would band together as players and just, let's get through today. And, how can we become a better team by the end of practice today? And you just do that. And the one thing that solves every problem is winning.
Yeah.
You win, there's no problems.
Well, so part of what you said there, though, I think is really important for young athletes to understand is I think sometimes when I've had players that have come to my office that have been in those situations, they often think that it has to do something with them or that they're the only one that's experiencing that. And I think what you're saying is that's not usually the case.
In the NHL, I was coached by a very famous head coach, won a Stanley Cup or two. And I've never met anyone that could treat people like he did, not just the players, but anyone that demanded so much respect and gave none. So, sometimes you got a coach that's like that, where it's my way or the highway. But talking to your players, when you're pro, that things are different then, because you're on the bus and you're in the back and everyone hates the coach, and you can vent a little bit, but that's the price for admission to play sports is it's one of the, and it's the grass isn't greener on the other side. And it's the one thing that has always happened here in Minnesota is there's players going from community-based, going to a private school or transferring and all that. The grass isn't greener always on the other side, so you try to go where the love is, and you hope that at the end of your hockey career that you had more coaches that you enjoyed than you didn't. And, the other thing that I'll say is that in a lot of times, if there's one coach that you're having a problem with, there's usually an assistant coach that you can kind of connect with to kind of, they have, you always have that dynamic in a coaching, at least the good teams do.
I don't know if you pay that much attention to football, but, this last year when Sam Darnold was lighting it up for the Vikings, a lot of people thought that he was playing so much better because of the system and the coaching he was in. Do you think there's validity to that idea that sometimes the right coach can unlock something in a player?
Well, it's been proven, over and over. I listen to him all the time in podcasts and read about him, how Lou Holtz, how long did he coach before, he kind of found the magic formula? But all I can, speak from is my experiences as a player and as a coach. There were a lot of years that you knew that it was going to be challenging because maybe you were a young team, an inexperienced team as a youth program, high school, you're playing in 10th grade, and guess what? There's 8 other 10th graders playing and you got 2 seniors. You're going to struggle that year. But when the dominoes align and you're older, more experienced, and you went through, unfortunately, part of the path is going through these heartaches. And, I went through it. I'm still going through it. And there's only one team at every level that's happy at the end of the year.
That's true.
Everyone else is feeling the same way. Just some people get to feel it a little earlier in the playoff run than others. But, it always fades. They're never mistakes and the heartache. We remember great moments, but they fade. The same thing happens with the not so great ones. So we just stick with it. And, once you get to the end of one objective or goal, best way to get moving is to start another one and start reaching.
Who's the best player you ever played with?
That I played with? Man, that's a really good question. I played with a lot. I would say the total package as far as leadership, skill and everything. I had the most respect for a guy named Daniel Alfredson, who I believe is, I don't know if he's the GM for Ottawa now, but he's some involved there. But him, Pavel Bure, he was pretty doggone good. I mean, like special good. So but the majority of the players out there are just meat and potatoes, whatever amount of skill that was needed to play in the NHL. I just squeaked in, just got my nose over the wire. But, you have to have the belief that you can, keep climbing the ladder, and it's a slow process, and enjoy every level because, I look at all the state tournaments because, being a coach, you live a lot of heartache, A lot of people I trained made the state tournaments, and some won, some lost. But, as a youth, I made it to one state tournament, and that was when I was a peewee up in International Falls. I'll never forget it. We took second place. Then the other big dance that I had was national championship when I played for the Gophers. We played here in St. Paul in '89, lost to Harvard. double overtime. So when you have that special run, you got to really embrace it and cherish it because it doesn't happen all the time.
Yeah. As you've played and as you've coached and watched your kids play, what's one mental habit that separates the average from the players who grow and thrive?
They're able to get through unproductive thoughts quicker.
Yeah.
And they are able to do things on a daily basis, even when they don't want to. Your brain's telling you, all right, I should eat good food. I should go to bed right now. All right. That's a conversation that we have. That's a mental habit. Can you quiet the one wolf in your brain that wants to be the lead dog?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, and you're not going to win every day. You just hope that, at the end of the week, you've strung a bunch of really good days together. And if you can do that over a long time, you usually can get to where you want to go.
So what's one thing you know now that you wish you had known, particularly about the mental side of sports, wish you had known when you were playing?
Well, I kind of got introduced to it in college a little bit. My uncle, played a little bit at the University of Minnesota, but he was one that kind of helped me a little bit through some tough times. But once I turned pro, then I started working with a guy like you, and that's where things started to change because I didn't even know a lot of this stuff existed, that, you could work on stuff with your mind. There was a study done, I can't remember who did it, but they interviewed a bunch of high profile athletes or whatever. And they said, what part of your game is mental, and there's a lot of different answers, but like 90% they say is mental, 10% physical. The next question, how much money do you spend developing the mental part of your game? And almost everyone was like very little or none. So I think that everything, the internet, the sharing of information, that it used to be something that a sign of weakness, that, I was afraid to block that shot but now people are talking, and then there's individuals like you that have made a career out of helping train these kids so they can, be a better version of themselves for their team, and, not only for the sport, but just to but to maneuver through this life a little happier with a little bit of extra
So
effort.
you were ahead of your time then, because I feel like back then it was a lot more stigmatized and less accepted. Do you feel like that perception has changed?
Oh, yes. I think much like you look at youth hockey teams now, there's just more skilled players out there. And why are there more skilled players? Because there's more skilled and informed coaches. And now people know, where parents, when they see some of these signs, a kid, saying, what's going on, Mom? My head, I can't stop thinking about this. And now they can say, oh, this is normal. This happens for everyone. And there's ways that we can kind of, manage it, where we can push it aside and start controlling what we think a little better.
So I want to kind of change lanes a little bit and talk a little bit more about your sons, Rhett and Rem. So what's one mindset or value that you hope you passed on to them that has nothing to do with scoring or assists or outcomes?
Just, it's the golden rule. Just treat people how you want to be treated. Be kind. You can never go wrong with that. And to just always be genuine and truthful.
Yeah.
It's easy to talk to people when you're like that.
Well, and I often say mental fitness and your mental approach is simple but not easy.
Yeah.
Yeah. That seems to be a thing that we often forget. I think about Tom House, who was Tom Brady and Peyton Manning's throwing coach. And he said his job is to find the biggest thing and the simplest thing that can make the biggest difference the next time they go out on the field.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And I still at 57 years old go through days where I got to catch myself and I'm like, oh, why am I feeling this? What's bringing this on? Why is that thought in my head right now? So it's a never ending process where, I was listening to a podcast about a guy who climbed Everest and he came down and they interviewed him. And, his thing was, it was so awesome because when I was up there, I saw a peak that I never saw before. And I already started mapping out how I'm going to climb that one over there. So that's how it is. You just set the new one and you just keep rolling. And there's never a finish line. We just try to be the best versions of ourselves every day.
When you've worked with players who kind of get stuck with the idea that amazing means perfect or get like kind of perfectionistic, how do you help them coach through that mindset?
Oh, that's a really good one because, you're talking about my boys and a lot of the players that develop over time where for example, we're doing a challenge drill where they're shooting 10 or 12 pucks in a row, same shot. And they'll get 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, and they're pissed off. Not because of the 9 that they got, because of the one they missed. So I think that there's that part I don't want to change.
Yeah.
I mean, there was lessons where I walked out with my boys because they would vent physically, like slamming their stick on the ground. Rem threw his stick towards the net and it ended up impaling it on the back tarp. So I walked out a lot of lessons. So that fire, I can't teach that, that compete where you want to. So that's what I try to get kids to do is to realize that those feelings of anger or whatever it is, disappointment, that's the space you need to get to. Not all the time, but you got to get to that space. Otherwise, the development, your progress is slow. But if you can get in that space and, not get so angry where it disrupts, because that carries over into a shift when you're on the ice. What happens when you cough up the puck, body language changes and it's one shift can change the game. So you just got to learn to be good when you're playing bad, I guess.
Yeah, you're right. Like that's the key. I often will tell kids, you got to make a decision before the game starts to stay composed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And follow up and stay committed to it, which is a simple but not easy thing to do.
No. And but it is learnable.
Yeah.
I mean, you tell me, isn't it true that the humans are the only species on the planet that can do two things? We can develop our minds and our bodies.
Yes. And we're the only species that has an awareness of our consciousness.
That's cool. So let's take advantage of it.
Right. So 2 more questions. Let's say my son has come in and worked with you. What's something or anybody, what's something that you hope they take away from your lesson that has nothing to do with putting the puck in the net?
It's still going to have to do with stick skills. So most of the players, I'll ask them the first thing when we get together for the first time, I'll ask them, what's the big goal? What are you chasing here? For a lot of them, they want to, they want to make a top team. They want to play college hockey, want to play pro, boys and girls. The next 2 questions I ask are, when you're in your space at home, if you do off-ice training, what do you spend the most time doing? Let me give you an option. A pile of pucks away from the net, just ripping forehand shots. Almost every player, yep. Do you spend much time on the backhand? No. If they say, yeah, like how much? Maybe 20%. Half a hockey player. So I want them leaving caring about their backhand more than when they got there.
Yeah.
Because if you have big goals, if you tell me you're not doing that, then your actions aren't lining up with your long-term goal. And then the other thing is the amount of drills that they're doing in a space. Even though kids can go on YouTube, most kids, if they say they do more than forehand shooting, they might have 10, 15, 20 drills in their toolbox that they access over and over and over. Not enough to reach the higher levels. So that's where I kind of help them, with my online program. But yeah, I want them to want to train differently at home than they currently are. And I want them to care about their backhand equally as much as they do their forehand.
Do you think there's a point with training where you can hit a point of diminishing returns? I'll have kids that will go shoot pucks for 2.5 hours. And sometimes what I've said is, it's like the mini donut rule. The first 5 mini donuts are great.
Yeah.
But the last 5 suck. So to you, what's the line that where a player hits diminishing returns?
I don't know, because I don't know how you can sit there and go in the space. I mean, during COVID, I bring this example. If you had online learning during that time, I mean, what if the teacher just did the same lesson plan every day for 30 days? You would be punching people in the stomach. You'd be.
Yeah.
So, the variety of drills, but what I try to do is to teach them how to self-correct and to start asking questions. Like, how many times, if you took 10 shots, how many of those shots did you think about, why did I just miss that shot? And that's what over the course of time, there's a progression of drills that I get through where we teach them how to fish so they can feed themselves for a lifetime.
Well, and actually you now that I think about it, your previous answer actually answered that question, because what you're saying is you can go and shoot your forehand over and over again, but that is not going to necessarily lead to greater skill development because you're doing something that you're comfortable with.
Right. And it's like a game, like a training session with me. Yeah. You got great rounds and you got crappy rounds.
Yeah.
And that's just how training is. So it never gets boring unless you're doing the same thing. And you just never know when that unbelievable run will happen. And because I work with so many kids for a long period of time, they always have these special moments where I'll give you this is one drill I do with older players that are, really skilled, but I'll just have a pile of pucks probably 20 feet away from the net. And I'll just say, pick a top corner and start ripping, and let's see how many in a row you can get. So I can tell you for the older players, the highest score I got is 54 in a row. And I got scores all the way down to the low 40s with different players. And then obviously younger players, a lot of them can get into the 20s, but that does, they might have 6 rounds and they might got to 7 or 8 most. And then all of a sudden they get on that groove and they just pop, 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 pop. So you just got to keep playing.
Yep. Last question. What does the phrase "love your inner athlete" mean to you?
Oh, well, we can't love anyone else unless we love ourselves.
Yep.
We can't help anyone else, unless we can help ourselves. So invest in yourself, everyone. It all starts there.
Yeah.
And invest in things that make you more knowledgeable, more skilled, and that connect with what you're most passionate toward. And then, I always love the one phrase that, when the student's ready, the teacher will appear.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know how I get in front of a lot of people, and you probably don't either, but somehow, when they're ready, we get connected and it starts.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining me today. Always appreciate the conversations with you. I always come away learning something every time we talk, and enjoy all the work that you do. And I'm glad you're such a great mentor to kids. A lot of the kids that I have seen that work with you come back and just really love the experience and feel like they get a lot better. So, thanks a lot.
Thank you. Hey, thanks a lot. I'm we have known each other for a while, and I'm glad that you're in the podcast game. You were kind enough to come on mine when I was early on, and I'm in my 4th year doing it. So how long have you been going now?
Well, not even a year yet.
Okay, good. So it's a great platform, and I hope that something I said connects with someone and makes their journey a little easier. Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, continue what you're doing. Thanks for having
for
me
your
on.
time.